Robert Munger. On a scorching July day in 2017, the relentless Arizona sun beat down on the Lewis prison in Buckeye, but the true brutality was unfolding inside its air-conditioned, maximum security walls. The man at the center of it was Robert Munger, a 67-year-old inmate whose crimes had made him a pariah in the rigid social order of prison life. Munger was serving a 74-year sentence for the sexual assault and murder of his girlfriend, followed by the molestation of a young child. In the convict code, those who harm women and children are labeled skinners and are often marked for retributive violence. Among a group of inmates, Munger was targeted for execution. He was ambushed inside his own cell, overwhelmed by his attackers before he could even put up a fight. He was beaten and stabbed over and over with a makeshift shank, but the horror did not end with his death. As Munger lay dead or dying, one of the assailants used the shank to saw through the flesh and vertebrae of his neck, severing his head from his body. The inmates picked up the severed head and placed it on a shelf in the shower stall of the cell. When correctional officers performed a routine check, they were met with a vision of hell. Robert Munger's decapitated body lay in the cell, and his head positioned like a prize on the shower shelf. Darren Rainey, a 50-year-old inmate who suffered from severe schizophrenia, was serving a 2-year sentence for cocaine possession. Darren Rainey, in a state of mental distress and confusion, had defecated in his cell. In response, corrections officers decided on a punishment. They led Rainey to a single, cramped shower stall in the prison's transitional care unit, which housed inmates with mental illnesses. This was no ordinary shower. It was a makeshift torture device. The shower was rigged to be controlled by an officer from the outside who could set the water to a scalding temperature. For the next hour and a half to 2 hours, Darren Rainey was trapped in a blistering torrent of water. Other inmates in the unit heard his desperate, piercing screams as he was literally burned alive. He was heard begging and yelling. The officers allegedly mocked him, turning the water even hotter. The yelling ended only when Rainey collapsed, silent, onto the shower floor. When the officers finally opened the door, a horrifying scene awaited them. Rainey's body was covered in severe burns. His skin was so severely burned that it had shriveled and separated from his flesh, a condition consistent with being boiled. The official cause of death was listed as a combination of complications from his schizophrenia and accidental drowning, with the scalding water noted as a contributing factor. Rodney Holland, a 17-year-old kid from Beaumont, Texas, was sentenced to 8 years for arson. Standing just 5 feet 2 inches, he was placed in the Clemens Unit, an adult prison, where he was housed with violent offenders twice his age and size. Almost immediately, Rodney became a target for Cheek's assault. He was repeatedly cheek assaulted and beaten by other inmates. Desperate and terrified, the boy sought help. He filed formal grievances and wrote letters to the guards, begging to be moved to a safer location. His pleas were met with indifference. Guards allegedly told him to fight or give the cheeks up, and on January 6, 1996, after yet another physical assault, but this time, his tormentors escalated the violence. They doused his clothes with a flammable liquid and set him on fire. Rodney was engulfed in flames, suffering catastrophic burns over 90% of his body. Miraculously, he was not killed instantly. He was rushed to a hospital, where he lay in a coma for 4 months, his body fighting a losing battle against infection and organ failure. The altercation ended on May 8, 1996, when Rodney Holland Jr. finally succumbed to his injuries. Michael Tyree was a 27-year-old mentally ill inmate in a Santa Clara County jail. He was being held in the main jail's 6A module, a wing specifically designated for inmates with serious psychological disorders. On August 26, 2015, Tyree, who was bipolar, was awaiting transfer to a state mental health facility. The altercation that led to his death began during a routine cell check, just after 10 p.m. Officers Jara Lubrin, Matthew Ferris, and Rafael Rodriguez entered Tyree's cell. What followed was a sustained and vicious attack. The officers were angry that Tyree had allegedly defecated on his jail cell floor, a behavior consistent with his severe mental state. For nearly 30 minutes, the 3 officers beat, tortured, and mocked the helpless man. It was reported that they slammed him against the cell wall, punched and kicked him repeatedly, and then dragged him, naked and handcuffed, from his cell into a shower area to wash him off, continuing the assault there. In a final, cruel act, they forced him to drink from a bottle of a cleaning solution used to strip floors, and few moments after that, they returned Tyree to his cell and left him there, dying. He was found unresponsive during a later check. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma. The autopsy revealed massive internal injuries. His abdomen was filled with blood from a lacerated liver and spleen, injuries so severe they were comparable to those seen in high-speed car crashes. There were no cameras inside the cell, but the physical evidence and testimony from other inmates built an undeniable case. The 3 officers were arrested, charged with murder, and ultimately pleaded no contest to involuntary manslaughter, receiving sentences of 15 years each. LaShawn Thompson. LaShawn Thompson was a 35-year-old man being held in the Fulton County Jail in Atlanta, Georgia on a simple misdemeanor charge. In the spring of 2022, Thompson was locked in a cell that was infested with lice and bedbugs. His death was not the result of a sudden altercation, but a slow, relentless assault by neglect. For weeks, Thompson was left in a squalid cell where insects swarmed over his body. Other inmates in the unit, horrified, raised the alarm. They banged on their doors and pleaded with guards, telling them that the man in cell 10 was in dire condition and being devoured by insects. But their pleas were ignored, and on the morning of September 19, 2022, when guards finally entered his cell, they found LaShawn Thompson dead. His body was emaciated and covered in filth and insect bites. The scene was so profoundly disturbing that the coroner's report would simply list the cause of death as severe neglect. The Carandiru Massacre. On October 2, 1992, the Carandiru Penitentiary in Sao Paulo, Brazil, was a ticking time bomb. It was the largest prison in Latin America, built to hold 4,000 inmates, but crammed with over 7,000. The prison was effectively run by the inmates themselves, with authorities controlling only the perimeter. On that Friday, a petty argument over a football match between 2 rival factions escalated into a full-scale riot in Pavilion 9. The altercation began with fists and homemade shanks. Inmates took guards hostage, and the sound of yelling and chaos echoed through the massive cell blocks. Rather than negotiating, the military police were called in. A force of over 300 officers, known as the Rota, an elite and notoriously violent unit, stormed the complex under the command of Colonel Ubiratan Guimarães. What happened next was not a resolution, but an extermination. The police, armed with automatic rifles, systematically cleared the prison, cell block by cell block. Many inmates of whom had already surrendered and were unarmed, were shot where they stood. Some were hunted down and executed in their cells, in showers, and under their beds. Witnesses and survivors describe police firing at point-blank range, finishing off the wounded and using excessive, indiscriminate force. When the smoke cleared, 111 inmates were dead, and not a single police officer was killed. The official police report claimed a fierce gun battle, but the evidence on the ground told a different story. Colonel Ubiratan Guimarães was eventually convicted for his role in the killings, but the conviction was later overturned. The prison itself, a monument to this horror, was later demolished in 2002.